Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of Lazio Lounge. You can understand from the song, and I'm sorry for Alistair dancing, but yeah, this is what you get. I'm sorry. But we're going to talk about an incredible era, an incredible moment for Lazio, because we're going to talk about the Lazio of the first Scudetto, Lazio of 1974. Alistair McKenzie, it has been an incredible story for Lazio. I mean, for a lot of people not living that period like we did, it's an unbelievable story, full of anecdotes, things to talk about. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it in 1 hour.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it sounded like a great idea at the time to do a podcast about this because obviously this is our Lazio Icons series. So far, we focused on individual players, but every week people were giving us players from the 1974 team, which is part of the reason we wanted to just dedicate an episode to that team as a whole. But yeah, I mean, it is an incredible story, the likes of which you would never ever see in modern day football, from a completely different time. And yeah, I think it's going to test our mettle to get through this in a decent amount of time. So we better get started.
Yeah, before I think we have to give a context. We are talking about the 70s. It's an incredible period in Italy. It's the period called Anni di Piombo, years of lead in English, if I'm not wrong. There's a big fight between Brigate Nere, that are the fascist group, and Brigate Rosse, that are the communist group. And there have been a lot of fighting, a lot of people got killed in Italy. So it's a very dangerous period in Italy, but at the same time, it's probably the moment where football players become sort of legends, sort of myth. Obviously, there's not the type of money you have now in football, but football players become legend. They're not very professional, so this is why that team has been a sort of myth, I would say, because they go out in disco, they go out with the musician, actors, and things like that. Not very professional in comparing to these days, but they are myth, they are legends, and I think this type of team, I don't know, they would be dead last in modern football because of their behavior. But I mean, this is why they are a legend, I think, Alistair, because there were such incredible anecdotes about that type of Lazio that is simply unbelievable.
Yeah, they really are unbelievable looking back on them now, and we'll try and kind of pepper them in as we go through. You're right. I mean, the years of lead is obviously, as a backdrop, kind of explains a little bit more some of the more intense parts of the story. I was reading earlier that the gun ownership in Italy just absolutely skyrocketed at that time in terms of people being given licenses, and pretty much all of the Lazio team were armed at this time, which something else we'll get onto as well. Incredible selection of characters, very aggressive off the pitch, with each other, on the pitch, with opponents, with fans, with pretty much everyone. It's, for me, one of the most spectacular coaching achievements I think that Italy's ever seen, was that Tommaso Maestrelli managed to get this lot to be a cohesive unit on the pitch that managed to win a league title. So yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of the backdrop within the football world as well, it's worth mentioning where Lazio were around this time, because it wasn't that long before that Lazio were in Serie B. I mean, Maestrelli himself had taken Foggia up to Serie A, and then they got relegated again. But, you know, when he arrived at Lazio, they were a Serie B team. They'd just been relegated. As, you know, Chinaglia was there as well in Serie B. So was Pino Wilson, you know, who went on to be the captain, and leads them back into Serie A. And then in 72-73, the season before the Scudetto year, out of nowhere almost, it seems, he leads this team to third place in the league, and they've come very close to winning the league as well, having the best defence in Serie A, and it goes down to the last day of the season, Vittorio.
Yes, and you know, if you think, it's like Frosinone get promoted from Serie B and Serie A, and the year they get promoted, they fight for the Scudetto, which is simply unbelievable. And a lot of Roma fans says that Lazio sold the match against Inter. Well, there are facts. There are players of Roma saying that something strange happened that last match because Lazio was playing away against Napoli, Roma was playing at home against Juventus. Lazio was first, Juventus was second, and then there was Milan, who lost against Verona. And basically, Lazio was drawing against Napoli. Roma was winning in the first half against Juventus. And that means that Lazio would have won the title. And what happens? Suddenly, the president of Roma come in the locker room and said, hey, guys, we cannot allow Lazio to win the Scudetto. And what happened? Roma loses in the second half and Juventus win the Scudetto. So, a former player of Roma said something like that. A lot of Lazio fans believe they didn't want Lazio to win the Scudetto. But yeah, Lazio came so close to that title and it would have been simply unbelievable. The other thing, Alistair, is that if you look the team Lazio had, none of these players were coming from big team except Frustalupi. Chinaglia and Wilson came from a low team close to Napoli. Oddi and Nanni are from Lazio. All these type of players come from a small team. They weren't a smashing signing, that say, okay, this team is really good. This player is really, really top player. No, it's players come from nowhere that become a team, an incredible team.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really important place to start, I think, because one of the questions we got asked before doing this show, I can't remember who it was now, but it was about what the pre-season expectations actually were at the time. And, looking at some of the newspaper reports from the time, even though Lazio had just finished third and, like you say, had lost the league in dubious circumstances, let's say, there did seem to be an air of expectations that the challengers for the Scudetto are the usual ones, the Milan clubs, Juventus, and then I think Fiorentina, Napoli had good teams back then as well. But no one really expected Lazio to be able to repeat the season they just had, which was finishing third. So to then go on better and actually win the league was phenomenal. And the season Chinaglia has is something else. Like you say, this guy has almost come from nowhere. I mean, he could fill a series of podcasts by himself, his life, to be honest. But this, his family left after the war. He ended up going to being not born, but he moved to Wales when he was very young. He ended up starting his football career and playing in Wales, and before coming in, like you say, being picked up from lower leagues in Italy. But a very, very difficult character to manage. And to be honest, probably Maestrelli's greatest achievement was getting this guy to play the football that he did, because Chinaglia always said that he saw Maestrelli as his father figure, really, within the game.
We have to say that Maestrelli wasn't only the father of Chinaglia. Chinaglia also had to move there to live because after the derby, he had problems with Roma fan, and so finished the season living in Chinaglia's house and become very close to the kids of Chinaglia. But Maestrelli was also considered the father of all the other players of the team. They all be considered a sort of big family. But Maestrelli wasn't only a father. He was a great technician. He was the first manager to bring the idea of football that Cruyff had with his Netherlands team to Italian football. That's one of the secrets why a Lazio of average players, I would say, became such a great team, such a incredible formation, able to beat Juventus, Inter, and Milan. That was the top team of that era. So, you have to give great credit to Maestrelli because he was able to, cope with these incredible characters, make them a team, and make them, play an amazing type of football.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important point, I think. I mean, this team is talked about as being one of the first to really attempt the kind of Dutch total football that was so popular at the time, like you say. And by that we mean, I don't think anyone's kind of trying to compare this Lazio side to the great kind of Netherlands or Ajax teams at the time, but the fact that they were very much, high energy team, high pressing, players moving all over the park, and they did really get in the opposition's faces as well. I mean, to be honest though, it's when you actually look at the season, they did start fairly slowly, and I think going back to the point of what was expected of this team when the season first began, I think that there were probably a few murmurs at that point that their moment was almost up, but they did recover and they get to this point by which they beat Napoli and go become winter champions. But I mean, the Maestrelli thing is probably him and Chinaglia are the figures, I guess, who dominate this side. But Chinaglia scores 24 goals, I think it is, in this season. Wins Capocannonieri, and it's quite interesting now looking at the kind of footage of the way he played. You just don't really see a striker like that anymore. I mean, he's very much, he was nicknamed Long John, I think more because of his links to kind of John Charles and being a big physical striker as well, but good finisher. And his strength wasn't, being a guy who throws himself at headers. It was more in his accuracy and his shooting. And there's this myth that in his first training session with Lazio, he hit a shot so hard that it broke the crossbar. So I don't know if it's true or not, but I mean, it's one of many myths and anecdotes, I suppose, about this story.
Yeah, I mean, as we were saying, this team is full of anecdotes. The most, I think, known is that there was 2 locker rooms, right? The reason why they had this is because they needed more space at the beginning. First of all, Lazio didn't have Formello. They were training at Tor di Quinto, that it's an area close to For Italico, to the Stadio Olimpico. There was this training ground that now is called Maestrelli for the great manager, where the team was training. There were 2 locker rooms, and at the beginning, it was just to have more space. The team was big, the lockers weren't huge, so they had this. They were using the 2 of them, and then it became a sort of separation of 2 teams fighting against each other. There was the Giorgio Chinaglia team with Pino Wilson, and then there was the Martini locker room, the north part of Lazio fans, because Lazio players, because as I said, there was Frustalupi that was coming from the north, etc. They had a different mentality from Chinaglia, and then there was Pino Wilson that was changing in the Martini locker, but was part of the Chinaglia group. So it was quite amazing, this thing, a team that should be playing together, and instead they fight during the week. And there's this legend of the Friday match that would never end, because Maestrelli was trying to make them finish in a draw every time, and there was fight, kicks, and Maestrelli was really concerned because it was just 2 days ahead of the match on Sunday. So if you talk with this Lazio legend, they will tell you, we gave everything in this match. We were fighting one another, and it was simply unbelievable.
Well, I think the best kind of thing that demonstrates just how brutal those end of the week training matches was that this was before the point where players were forced to wear shin guards for matches. And apparently the only time that anyone in the Lazio squad would ever wear shin guards was for these training games at the end of the week, because they would absolutely lay into each other. And yeah, I mean, when we're talking about a divided team, we're not talking about, Mauro Icardi and Maxi Lopez, or some kind of, some players having a fallout in the modern game. We're talking about guys who genuinely are fighting each other and throwing punches and living in 2 different dressing rooms. I mean, the atmosphere of this time is incredible. I mean, I guess the word that always comes up describing this atmosphere of the time really is anarchy. And because there were, like you say, these extremes on both sides of the political divides, going on in Italy, a lot of violence happening around the country, and Lazio is almost a microcosm of that. And I guess that's part of the reason why they've become such a memorable team in a way.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And as you were saying at the beginning, throughout the season, they all start having a gun. So this added something a little bit more to the legend, right? It started Giorgio Ghinaglia, then all the other. Sergio Petrelli was called the cowboy because he had a shotgun. And there is this legend, right, that they would go in a hotel before the match, the night before the match. And once Petrelli was so lazy that didn't want to turn off the light, so he shot to the light and to turn it off. And obviously, Felice Pulici, that was the player sleeping with him, was quite concerned about that. And the legend says that the day afterwards, the owner of the hotel said, "I don't want any more Lazio in my hotel anymore if they do like that." So, and they were passing the Saturday afternoon, shooting at beers can outside the hotel. So if you think now Immobile or Milinkovic-Savic doing something like that, they get arrested after 3 minutes, and this was the 70s in Italy.
Yeah, I mean the gun stuff is probably the thing that they get branded with the most. This was the team with the guns kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, what went on at that hotel? I think it was called the Americana, kind of outside Rome. Has gone down in legend, really. I mean, supposedly they set up their own kind of shooting range of sorts where they had kind of various things to aim at, and they'd be shooting at birds out of their hotel windows or lampposts. There's even a story of some Roma ultras coming up to the hotel the night before a derby to try and keep them awake, to put them off their game. And as they came out, they just heard a gunshot going off, and then they all turned around and went away again. But I mean, all sorts of weapons as well. You're talking about kind of M16s, and I mean, it is just unthinkable, really, nowadays that this was going on. There was even a story that one of the pilots who was supposed to take them up for an away game refused to take off until they'd surrendered their weapons, because they were all coming on the plane armed and loaded, basically.
It was to go back to Rome. They flew to Milan, and the how it worked out normally was all Lazio players were traveling with a gun. They gave it to the pilot, and the pilot would keep it in the cockpit. But at the return, I don't know why the pilot was a little bit angry, and so said, "This time you don't fly with guns." So they had to leave them in a locker room in the airport of Milan and go back and fetch them. So, and then there's the other thing about Petrelli that was called the cowboy as well, because as we were saying, there was this years of lead, and Petrelli went to see a film that was considered a little bit too fascist, and some of communists found him outside the cinema and asked him, "What do you think about this film?" And instead of answering, he took out the shotgun and said, "Yeah, I love it. What do you think about it?" And they run away. So and Petrelli says there was the police there, and they simply turn their head another way to not look at me. So yeah, this is another incredible thing about that Lazio. And the other thing, Alex, there was, as we were saying, they were fighting on Friday, but they were a single team on Sunday. They were all helping each other in the official match. So this is another great secret of Maestrelli, making them play as a united team, as a group, while they were fighting during the week.
Yeah, and there's a few kind of famous examples of that, actually, but I think the most famous one was this game against Hellas Verona during the season, and Lazio were at home and were losing at half-time, I think 2-1, hadn't been playing well at all. And I think it had been one of these games where basically Chinaglia, who wore his heart on his sleeve at the best of times, was just getting a bit volcanic, where you could tell that something was going to happen. And supposedly, or so the story goes, Maestrelli kind of stood outside the dressing room because he knew that basically if this team got inside the dressing room at halftime, having played that badly, it would be complete chaos. They'd wreck the place and fight each other. So he just said, as soon as they arrived at the door of the dressing room, back out on the pitch. And then the Lazio players immediately walked back out on the pitch and basically spent the whole of half-time out waiting for Verona to come back out. And yeah, the accounts of it are amazing. You know, apparently just the crowd was just whipped up into this frenzy almost from seeing the team just standing there waiting. And they were just waiting, focused on the second half. And then obviously the rest is history, and they turned it around and blew Verona away and won the game. So
yeah, there's this book that I read that is Pistole Palloni that talk about this period, and Gigi Martini says that when Verona come back after 15 minutes, they're surprised to find all Lazio players there and ready, and the fans are fired up because at that time Stadio Olimpico was packed pretty much all the matches, so the fans was chanting, and Verona come back and they're astonished, and Martini says you can see they were scared about this. They were really concerned. And in fact, Lazio win this match 4-2. And after 20 minutes, Lazio is already 4-2 and the match is finished. So Maestrelli was good in be able to get the best out of these players. There's Martini saying that, obviously, as I said before, there are two factions, right? There's Chinaglia and Martini. They are the two boss in this club, and there have been some fight during the week, and every time Maestrelli will call them in their locker room, be silent, facing them, and be like 30 seconds silent, and then start talking about other things like how is your family and things like that, and this will close the situation. And Chinaglia felt like Maestrelli was like his father. Martini was very close to Maestrelli as well, and he was handling this situation like that, and it worked. It worked. When Maestrelli left, the team collapsed, even though, you know, no one really left that club. So you can see how the leadership of Maestrelli was so important.
Yeah, although, I mean, I guess one of the moments from this season that we need to talk about where perhaps he didn't manage to do that and didn't really manage to keep a lid on things was this game against Ipswich Town. And I guess, you know, there's an argument that one of the reasons that perhaps this Lazio side is so kind of well remembered inside Italy but not outside Italy is the fact that they didn't really make a dent in Europe at the time. And the reason for that was basically because of what happens in this game against Ipswich Town. So this is in the UEFA Cup, second round, I think it was.
Yep.
Ipswich win the first leg in England 4-0, which basically, you know, pretty much ends the contest, but not so much for this Lazio team, because when they come to Rome, well, I mean, the whole thing starts, I think, more or less in terms of the antagonism, not only from the first leg, but then the Roma fans kind of do some sort of ceremony, I think, for the Ipswich players. They kind of come and give them gifts for their services to Roma for what they did in the first leg. But then in the game itself, Lazio are 2-0 up within, I think, 10 or 15 minutes very early on. And, you know, there's a real belief that this can happen. And then what happens next is kind of one of these, there's many parts of the story that you get different accounts, really. But I had a look at the highlights of this game earlier to see for myself. What happens next is pretty clearly a handball off the line from an Ipswich player to prevent a certain goal, which isn't given by the referee. And then Ipswich are given a penalty, which doesn't really look like a penalty. And the accounts of the Lazio players at the time as well are that the referee was slurring his words, so they think he was drunk during the game.
Yes.
Anyway, it turns into Lazio win 4-2, but they go out. But it turns into a massive basically a massive brawl, doesn't it?
Yes, there is. I think Oddi that says that the referee was drunk, and so he incredibly misses the goal that would put Lazio 3 goals ahead. So close to the incredible victory. Garlaschelli, I think, scores after a minute or so. So Lazio in that year was amazing. Was really difficult to stop. So they were playing really well. But for people who never saw a match of that period, we are not talking about this type of football where if you make a bad tackle you get a yellow card, etc. Strikers weren't defended by referee like that, so it was a sort of a fight. And Lazio fan start shouting to the ref. It was like the Colosseum back in the days, right? And as we say, the temperature of Lazio players was terrible, and they had this fight after the end of the match, and Lazio gets disqualified for the European competition after that. It's funny because a lot of players says the ref was drunk. The Ipswich Town players were making fun of Lazio players before the match, so Chinaglia was already very nervous, and this is what happened. And I think Lazio was the only team with Chelsea to won the league and didn't play for the Champions League for this reason. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, the footage of this. There are fans trying to get on the pitch, getting pulled away and so on. I mean, everyone was very angry, as well as the way that the actual players behaved after the game, and the Ipswich fans kind of barricaded in their dressing room. Apparently Chinaglia kind of acting as a peacekeeper in all of this somehow for the first time in his life. But yeah, I mean, just to clarify that, so that I think Lazio are given a 3-year ban to begin with, and eventually it's reduced to 1 year. But yeah, like you say, I think the champions of Italy not being allowed to play in Europe the next year possibly did have an influence on their legacy to a certain extent. But I mean, this wasn't that rare a thing to necessarily be happening. I mean, the other story that pops out is again with an English team, with Arsenal, and that was, I think, a couple of years before this, where Arsenal were in Rome for a game, and it basically ends up that they're at some sort of ceremonial dinner in central Rome, and everything's quite nice. And all of a sudden, it's like the Wild West, and people are throwing chairs at each other and going out on the street to have fights because, I mean, the story I read was that the Arsenal players were presented with some sort of kind of leather bags as a kind of goodwill gesture, and they were making fun of them being too effeminate and upset the Lazio players or offended them, and before you know it, they're all fighting. I mean, it is just a different time, though, I suppose.
Yeah, there are many type of legends about that team, that Lazio, and that era. So, yeah. Plus, we have to admit that Chinaglia was making strange jokes. I remember the year afterwards, the second goalkeeper, I think, had a new watch, a very expensive watch, and he showed it to Chinaglia, and Chinaglia threw a hammer against it and break it and said, "You see, it's not that good. It doesn't work anymore." So, and not a lot were laughing at that moment, but this was Giorgio Chinaglia, a little bit similar to Paul Gascoigne, we can say. So, yeah, it was an incredible team. It was really an incredible team, and comparing these football players to the one we see now, you struggle to understand how they were able to win. But when they were coming on the pitch, when they were playing on Sunday, they were an incredible team working together, fighting, defending each other. Yeah. So that was something of the incredible thing. And the other thing, Alistair, was Chinaglia in the derby. Lazio fan loved him because Chinaglia absolutely loved winning the derby. We have to say that Chinaglia was that type of player that hate losing and wasn't happy when he didn't score. If Lazio could win 4-0. If he didn't score, he wasn't happy, and that was a problem for the rest of the team. But winning the derby was his mission, and with him, Lazio always won the derby, so Lazio fans loved him.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on that with the Di Canio episode last week, where basically his celebration of kind of pointing towards the Roma fans after scoring a goal in the derby became iconic, and that was then mirrored by Di Canio all those years later. But yeah, I mean, he was an explosive character, and I think as well the experience he has the summer after this season at the World Cup kind of underlines how good a job Maestrelli did with him, because he wasn't an easy guy to deal with, wasn't an easy guy to get along with by all accounts, to be honest. And at the World Cup, where Italy go there kind of thinking they might have a decent chance of winning the thing, and Chinalia's first game was against Haiti, I think, and Italy win, but he gets substituted off. Says Vaffanculo at the Italy bench, at the manager, storms off, trashes the changing room and gets dropped, and his World Cup's over. So, I mean, and Italy end up going out in the group stage. So it does go to show, I suppose, only months after winning the Scudetto, what happens if you can't manage Chinaglia well.
Yeah, it's even true that, you're the striker of the team that just won the Scudetto. You're the top scorer of Serie A. We said it, in that period, Lazio players were very considered for the national team. Felice Pulici was a great goalkeeper. He hasn't been called. Chinaglia was sort of forced to be called to go to the national team. He didn't receive the same, credits he should. And I'm not saying he behaved correctly. Don't get me wrong. But I think Lazio players should have deserved more credits for what they did, what they achieved. And I mean, they didn't receive that much from the national team, which was simply inexcusable. Said this, we said Chinaglia was an incredible striker, a very great striker, complete striker, a great fighter in and off the pitch, but he was difficult to handle. He was very hard to handle, and this is one of the secrets of Maestrelli. Maestrelli had, we say that in these days, we say that it's very difficult to handle a team with different personality. Well, here it's not the case of 2 or 3. This is all the team had very strange personality. I mean, Felice Pulici, the goalkeeper, was probably the only normal player in a team of madmen, of crazy people. So this tells you how great Maestrelli was.
And also, it was a really small squad as well. I mean, he only uses 18 players the whole season, and a couple of those, I think, only play for one game each or something. So it's not only the fact that he's managing to keep all these guys in a position where they're capable of playing like a team every weekend, but he's managing to do that with this smaller squad. And like you already mentioned, a squad that didn't have money spent on it in the way that other teams did. Didn't have any obvious superstars in it. I mean, Chinaglia was the superstar of that team, but he was kind of made that by Maestrelli, by Lazio. I mean, just to finish off the kind of story of the season, I suppose, I mean, I just wanted to go through some of the big moments. And I was looking at it and saw that in the February of that season, they go and beat Juventus, who were the kind of biggest rivals at the time, beat them 3-1. And I just thought, that sounds awfully familiar. But yeah, and there's another game against Napoli, away to Napoli in April, where Napoli go take the lead 3 times in a row, and 3 times Chinaglia scores to get a hat trick to get a draw. But eventually, it's on the 12th of May 1974. Lazio beat Foggia, which is Maestrelli's old team, of course, 1-0 at the Olimpico, and they win the league with a game to spare. And it's amazing looking at the scenes of the celebration of that title in Rome, and the kind of fans flooding onto the pitch and hugging the players and the flags, and it's almost like a black and white version of what happens 25 years later in the 2000 Scudetto. Is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we didn't mention is that in the summer, Lazio didn't sign any player. So, it's not that Lazio bought other players to improve the team. That was the players. And in fact, there's a very young Vincenzo D'Amico that was coming from the Primavera that started playing with Lazio. And there's this, D'Amico scores in the second derby, the 2-1. Lazio went down and then D'Amico scores. And it's funny because, if I'm not wrong, that's the derby where Chinaglia kicked in the ass D'Amico because he's a little bit too lazy in one chance. This tells you how Chinaglia was and how he felt the derby. And D'Amico was an incredible player, but he came from the Primavera, so he was a great addition coming from the youth academy of Lazio. And Chinaglia was such an incredible fighter. And in the derby, legend says that before the derby, he would go to the Curva Sud and say hello and look himself, and they will throw him, cans and things like that, and he would simply enjoy it. So,
do you want to? I mean, we've talked quite a lot about Chinaglia, but I think people might be interested in knowing kind of who the main figures were kind of on the pitch in this team. And you also mentioned Pulici in goals as well. Pino Wilson we've talked about, who's the captain defender. I mean, one of the guys we've not really got onto yet so much is Ray Ciccone, who's also very highly regarded in that team as well. But like we already said, this was a team that was playing nice football as well. And despite not being big names, these were good footballers who were capable of playing nice stuff.
Yes, absolutely. So the let's say the starting 11 was Pulici, the goalkeeper. Then you had Martini, Wilson, Petrelli, and Odion on the sides. Midfield was Frustalupi, that was the only player coming from a big team. He was a sort of, the mediano, the one fighting to recover the ball. Close to him, there was Receconi, that was the talented player, the one that had not only legs, but even great talent. Then there was, in front, we had Garlaschelli, that was the striker playing close to Chinaglia, and then D'Amico, that was playing and coming in, or sparing time with Nanni, that was the other one coming from the Lazio Primavera. This was the starting 11. Facco was the starting left back before the starting the season, but he got injured. That's why Petrelli become the starter. Talking about Receconi, he was called the blonde angel because he was blonde hair, and when he was playing, he was moving like an angel. And he was another secret of this team, right? Another player coming from not a big team, but playing an amazing football. And he was a complete midfielder, perfect to the Maestrelli type of football. He was good in recovering the ball, going and playing the ball, and also scoring. Even if he didn't score that many goals, he had a terrific season and probably was the secret why Lazio won that Scudetto that year.
Yeah, and he was a player who'd played under Maestrelli already when they were together at Foggia. So I mean, it goes to show that, like you already mentioned, Maestrelli was capable of forming these relationships with players, and clearly that helped in him making the move and getting the best out of him when he was there. So yeah, I mean, it is strange because you run through that lineup, and I reckon if you give that lineup to your bog standards 2020 Serie A fan, they probably haven't heard of any of them apart from Giorgio Chinaglia, which is a shame, but does tell you an awful lot about just how impressive an achievement it was for this team to win the league, I think. Perhaps tells you that they should have been better celebrated than they were, that they deserved more credit than they got. But yeah, I mean, we should probably move on a little bit to the kind of aftermath of this season, right? I mean, what happens next? Because that is as much of the story really as the season itself, because things almost kind of go badly as quickly as they came good, right?
Yeah, we can say that Lazio had a curse because they won the Scudetto. People believe that that team could continue going on because they were a young team, talented, and instead it's like a curse hunting that team. And yeah, unfortunately things didn't continue. Kinaya had a fight, problems with his family, left, went to America, US. Unfortunately, Maestrelli found his problem, his cancer, and had to quit the team. Then he came back eventually when they thought he won the battle, but it was just a period. So, and then going further, the incredible thing that happened to Receconi, right? The death of Receconi, that is still something that people are still discussing. He was living in an area called Fleming, went to this joinery close home. I think he was robbed a couple of weeks before, and he came in with another Lazio player, and it looks like he said, "This is a robbery," and the owner of the shop shoot him, and that's why he died. Other people says he didn't say that. He had his hands in his pocket, and the owner thought that he had a gun. So, but yeah, really, you have to think this team had the curse, and it's simply unbelievable what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Receconi thing was, I suppose, kind of. I think he died within a couple of days from Maestrelli, didn't he? They were really close together, and that kind of pulled the curtain over this period, and things kind of really slid and got worse after that. But yeah, I mean, like you say, I think that tells you an awful lot about these years in Italy as well. I mean, supposedly a big part of the reason for this happening in the first place was because jewelry shops couldn't get insurance because they had such problems at the time with armed robberies because so many people were holding guns, and nobody would insure jewelry shops because they were getting robbed so often. And this particular jeweler or shopkeeper had been robbed not long before this happened. So he was very jumpy about the whole thing. And when Receconi came in, and this was a guy who already had a reputation as someone who likes practical jokes. He wasn't political like the other guys in the team were, some of them, and he wasn't really one to take sides so much like a lot of the other guys in the team. And so I suppose it would be within character for him to do something stupid, but that's a big part of the reason that the shopkeeper was there, ready to actually shoot him in the chest and kill him, because it was something that was happening quite frequently at the time. And of course, yeah, with Maestrelli, it's just a tragedy, I think it was liver or stomach cancer.
Yeah.
And it all happens very quickly because he's diagnosed and it's terminal, and he didn't have long. So, and this is all, when you're talking about a curse, this is all within the space of about 3 years. Lazio go from winning that title against all odds, from playing that incredible football, from somehow getting their balance right with all these characters, to almost getting relegated. Very, very, I think it's only goal difference, isn't it, that stops them from getting relegated. And Maestrelli dying, Receconi dying, and Giorgio Chiellini heading off to play with Pelé in New York instead.
Well, as we said, Maestrelli was the reason why Lazio played that well. And when he left, the magic is gone. No one can replace him and be able to contain this team. And immediately after he leave, the team collapsed because he was really the father of this team, of these players. And when the players found out what happening, they are not able to play or to perform like before. And this happened quite fast. And the week before he dies, there's a derby, and Lazio is able to win it. but only because Felice Pulici make an incredible save in the last second, and he get the interview after the match, and Pulici, that is quite silent, says, "I want to dedicate this victory to Maestrelli," and the rumors are that this is the last thing Maestrelli will hear before he dies, and it's touching. It tells you how much this team is was a family, and I think Pino Wilso said in the book, I cried more at the when Maestrelli died than when my dad died, because we were such a family, so attached to this type of manager. Another thing very important that we didn't mention is that the kids, Maestrelli had twins, and they were always at the training ground, training with the other players. So, they were really a family. That's why everybody was close to the Maestrelli family. And I don't remember when, but one of the I don't know if Lenzini or someone else, Lenzini was the owner, the president of Lazio, says to Maestrelli, "Your kids cannot come here in the pitch." He simply quits, and the sport director have to chase him back and bring him back. And he said, "This is my family, and they are here with me." So, yeah, it's all a big part of family, and it's sad that all collapsed so fast and so dramatically, I would say, because if Mourinho leave Inter is nothing dramatically. If the manager dies so fast, and then Receconi dies in that incredible episode, it's a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it probably only kind of heightens the myth around this team as well, though, is that they came, they went as quickly as they arrived. But yeah, I mean, for all these reasons put together, I mean, it's hard to not say that Maestrelli was the greatest coach Lazio ever had. I mean, considering his ability to not only get this team to be united, considering the characters he was dealing with, but get them to play in a nice style of football. And on top of that, get them to win the league against all odds without much money going into the team, without any superstars to rely on. I mean, it was an incredible feat of management, and I hope that doesn't get diluted over the years, because it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't deserve to be. So if anything, I mean, that's something worth taking away from looking back over this 74 Scudetto, was just what an incredible feat of coaching that was.
Yeah, it was an incredible story. Again, probably that period was perfect for that, for this type of team. We didn't talk a lot about the outside the football pitch. Garlaschelli was considered a Latin lover, how we say in Italy. Was changing fiancé every weekend. A lot of them were going to the disco during the week. So, there is that type that probably added to the myth of these players that are, incredible players, and then outside the pitch, they are going outside, disco, dancing, films. We started with Giorgio Chinaglia's song, Do you know if Cristiano Ronaldo composed a song? No, he didn't. This is incredible football, incredible period. And these were incredible players. I think they will always be remembered. And, the thing is, what would Lazio achieve if Maestrelli wouldn't die so early, and Chinaglia wouldn't leave so early? This team maybe would have been able to win consecutive season.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's there's a lot of what ifs around it, I suppose, but even so, I mean, I think that they still managed to achieve more than anyone really expected them to, more than anyone really had any right to expect them to at the time. It's a shame they didn't get to play in the European Cup. I think.
Yeah.
that's such an interesting competition at that time as well, given that it's all knockout and none of, it's a much different thing back then, traveling for away games. Nobody is watching European football on Sky every weekend. Nobody has a clue who Ipswich Town are or who Lazio are. I mean, so these games were almost as unpredictable as they come, and that's why I think that competition is probably a lot more interesting then than it is now, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, so that's another thing, I suppose, that's a shame and a bit of a regret as well. But I mean, looking back on it, I just still can't help get the feeling that there can't really be any regrets about that team in the sense of what they achieved on the pitch, because it just seemed so unlikely in many ways.
I don't know. Probably the loss of Maestrelli changed everything, and the impact he had to the team was simply unbelievable. They were all a big family. Everybody says Lazio was a big family. Maestrelli was the father, and Lenzini was the sort of grandfather, bringing all together. Not a big budget, as we said. Players coming from small teams and able to have an incredible success, an incredible story. Yeah, maybe the magic was gone, but I think this team could have still compete for the top places. And maybe win the Coppa Italia.
Yeah, well, that would have been nice. They won the the Coppa degli Alpi?
Yeah.
Which no longer exists, obviously, but it's but yeah, I mean, just to finish on Quinaglia, though, obviously he goes off to the States, and actually, I think I don't know if he still is, he was one of the all-time top scorers over in America, scored a ridiculous amount of goals for the Cosmos, but, that's with Franz Beckenbauer is there, and Bobby Moore is there, and Pele, obviously, and he's famously has a go at Pele for being too lazy. And I think one of my favourite lines I found from him, which I think kind of sums up his character quite nicely, was that afterwards he got asked in an interview if he'd played with Pele, and he just replied saying, "No, Pele played with me."
He scored much more than Pelé in the States. In fact, there is this fact that when there is the World Cup in the US in '96, there's Pelé talking in a press conference, and suddenly Quinaglia comes in, and all the US journalists stop talking to Pelé and switch to Quinaglia, because in the US, Quinaglia was the top player, was the legend.
And he must have been a lot more interesting to talk to than Pelé, to be honest. Yeah, no, incredible story. Obviously, Quinaglia died in 2012, I think it was. And yeah, I suppose, lucky enough in some ways to be there for it was the game against Napoli, where he was kind of remembered afterwards, and that was quite a moving day, actually. I remember at the stadium, because they had his son come over, and he laid his shirt on the centre circle before the game, and everyone was singing his name. And I think it says a lot that, all those years later, he was still given, I guess, the reception that he deserves for what he achieved at the club. And Maestrelli and him are like we've said, the kind of dominant figures of this team. It wasn't just them, but they are the ones that really stand out.
Yes, absolutely. And there's the Premio Maestrelli that every year is assigned to the best manager of the season, and the best emerging manager, because Maestrelli was considered an emerging manager, one of the best of that period. And who knows, maybe he would have been the national team manager in a couple of years. So who knows what he could achieve. And yeah, it's very sad. Unfortunately, this story is very funny at the beginning, amazing, and then ends badly, very sadly. And yeah, I would say in a lot of senses a very typical Lazio story. But yeah, it resumed the legend. Maybe the myth is thanks to what happened afterwards. But yeah, I think it's very touching. I mean, As I said, I read this book that unfortunately is only in Italian. And if you're a Lazio fan, but even if you're not, you start crying. There's nothing else to do when you hear about Maestrelli and what happens to him. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, before you make us all burst into tears, it might be worth wrapping it up.
Yeah. Again, thanks everybody for listening. And remember, you can subscribe to the channel on YouTube or iTunes. Please rate and review the podcast on iTunes. We had some reviews last week, so please keep coming them. Support our podcast on patreon.com/Lazio Lounge. We have our eShop. So if you want to have some Lazio shirt, we design hats as well. There's the link. This is the last edition we made. So, support us in many ways if you like the show. And we'll come back next Sunday. And maybe there's going to be an update of football because maybe football is coming back. Good night, Alistair.
Good night.